Hintze, председатель директоров UPC Austria, и он расскажет нам о модели конкуренции в телекоммуникационных рынках, о международных практиках.
Thank you very much. How does it work? So I speak English and everybody understands me, or do you mostly do the same? So I'm the only one wearing this. Well, thank you for the invitation. I have seen a few junior participants to the industry, since there are people around that have not experienced the 2008 crisis. I've been in the industry for 35 years, and I'm happy to be back in Moscow. I was here the first time in 1993, which is when Bank of Austria opened the first branch office outside of Austria in Moscow. And I was an engineer for the incumbent at the time. I'm still an engineer by heart. I installed a satellite connection from Moscow to Vienna personally, such that the extensions here looked like they were sitting in Vienna. So that was my first time, and I can see many things have changed since. On the company side, I represent actually a Nasdaq listed company. It's called UPC Austria in Austria, but at the Nasdaq level, it's called Liberty Global. If you want to look it up, the ticker LBTYA. If you want to buy stock, we recommend it, I'll tell you why. And we represent 60 million customers in 12 countries, mostly in Western Europe. That's been done by acquisition only. And what I will do is, as I go through the agenda that I've prepared, maybe I answer the questions that you asked, and maybe a comment from a Western European point of view as we experienced it. So I'll start as an example with Austria, as is the most competitive market in Western Europe, and a good example of looking of what happened on all the services throughout the years. And I think it makes sense to go through all the services separately. It's just an example. I can also comment, if you want, on other markets like Germany, UK, Switzerland, Netherlands, Belgium, and others. But Austria is a good blueprint of understanding the competitive landscape, because it was liberalized 17 years ago. It was the first market in Western Europe that got fully liberalized, and that means all services. That includes fixed voice, of course mobile voice, data, and TV services. And I go through the services one by one, and as we've been talking about regulators, first comment that I have is that not all the three services in all countries are regulated by one regulator. In Austria we have two. We have one regulator that does the telecom services and one that does the media services. This is bad, because it's one market, it's one investment into one line that you try to drive the output from, and it also needs to be regulated, and it causes issues. It's not the same in every country, but for me, all three services are the ones that are relevant for our investments. And I go through them one by one. Fixed line telephony, make a long story short, is a dead service. We started, of course, in '98 with 100% penetration. Not all countries did. There were countries that didn't even have that penetration. And we now stand in the residential market at 53%. Only 50% of Austrian households have a fixed line, which means a phone. And only 50% of those use it. I give you the minutes. We have 506 million minutes. That was the third quarter of 2014, 506 million on fixed, 5.5 billion minutes on mobile. And also from a competitive point of view, early in the liberalization, there were sort of quick win models, like using the existing infrastructure with carrier pre-select services, call by call or others. Any of these business models are losing market share and are dying. So this it created a lot of operators in the year 2000, and after about 100 providers in Austria, we're now down to 4. Because without your own infrastructure, the competition is not sustainable. So carrier pre-select, call by call on the voice services, that created competition. Tele2 was a major player, but it's not sustainable, and at this point these business models are dead. Of course, as we move from fixed voice, it needs to be explained that of course most of the minutes were taken over by mobile, fixed to mobile transition, for a certain reason. As Austria was one of the first countries in Western Europe to liberalize the telecommunications market, we had 5 MNOs in the country. A fierce competition that drove prices down, and that also then moved people, residential and business, from fixed to mobile. Coming to the question, what happened ever since? 5 operators, MNOs, that is too many for a market and is not sustainable. Since 2 years, we're going through consolidation of the market, and we are now down to 3 providers. And I would say that is a healthy number for mobile operators in any given country in a normal business environment. And they would be 40% of market share is held by the incumbent, Telekom Austria, 30% T-Mobile, and another 30% Hutchison. So that is now happening. Opened up the market very quickly. What the regulator did together with the politician, and that's a question of whether or not this is a good idea, they optimized the income of frequency auctions. Austria was the country, the last time we did it was 2013. They really tried to optimize the income of the frequency, and it was auctioned by 2 billion euros. That was the highest frequency price that was paid per capita in the European market. So that is now over, and we are going through a phase of provider consolidation, 3 mobile providers. And of course, as we talk about mobile, you need to also talk about mobile data, and then there's the next segment, since we sort of covered voice, and I will come back to that later, with all the technologies that are IP-based, with voice becoming IP application, any voice traffic being carried on fixed or mobile data now looks more and more like data. That takes me into the second services, which is data. And there we just moved into a big discussion of what is the sustainable business model there. And that directly leads to the fact, which infrastructure do you have, which infrastructure do you use, and which infrastructure do you invest in? And what we saw on data is different from country to country. Where there was DSL, I'm talking fixed now, DSL and cable, like countries like Switzerland, Netherlands, Belgium, on almost 100% penetration, there is infrastructure competition. And only infrastructure competition really works. There was DSL and HFC competing right into the customer's home, and that led to the highest penetration in all European countries. And what we see now is that between DSL and HFC, there is a settled difference, which is the speeds that you can offer. DSL limit is 30 megabit, give or take, and on the HFC you can reach 4 gigabit if you use all the spectrum that's available. And now the countries, and that's what we see now, get divided into two areas on fixed. Mostly cities that have all the infrastructure that you want because the market works, and rural areas where there is mostly DSL and there was no investment in the past. And now, of course, I don't know if you read about the EU recommendation that by 2020 every household in Europe should have access to at least 100 megabit line. And the question there is, how do you go about it? Who does the investment into the infrastructure? Who owns it? Who controls it? And who operates the services? And I give you just some recent developments. What we saw over the years is that markets worked where there is density. In the cities, broadband is available, broadband meaning 100 megabit and up. In the rural areas, where there was just one provider and only DSL, the market doesn't work. Of course, mobile sort of tapped into this gap and started offering mobile services. However, the performance of mobile is always a little bit, as a fixed is superior to mobile and doesn't meet the requirements that are needed. What happens now is that there's big discussions as to how you deploy the infrastructure, and recent decision in Austria was, and that's also the case in many other European countries, is done by way of subsidies. Since Austria optimized the income from the frequency auction, half of the 2 billion that was produced, which means 1 billion, will be now poured into the market to build passive infrastructure. Now, who gets the money? This is now the question, and I have a personal recommendation. Infrastructure doesn't scale. If you build any given home, if you dig up roads, if you do all the in-house wiring, and it's very important for broadband, what does the in-house wiring on new build actually look like? What do you put in there? It's perceived that it's fiber, but it's not true. We still do coax even on new build because it is the cheapest way, it performs well, and there is no need. Of course, you need to prepare for fiber, but it's not a business model that currently works. So infrastructure doesn't scale, and I would highly recommend that the infrastructure investments stay in the country. Infrastructure can be invested by municipalities, can be invested by local companies, utility companies. It's very near to their business, and it's probably not something that is done by global providers. The global providers then offer the services. On the service side, data, voice, and TV, that scales well. There is scale on the service side, there is not scale on the infrastructure side. And that's not a discussion who actually provides the infrastructure. But there is seen to be a need to actually doing it, and also it was stated that the market in certain areas doesn't work. And that's after 17 years of liberalization, you have to put a threshold. Did it work or did it not work? Now, that's on data. The third area where there is, of course, huge discussions as to what's happening in the future is TV. And I said it earlier in my speech that TV is, of course, in my view, a telecommunication service. Because same thing happens as with voice. TV looks like data. More and more in the future, it was already mentioned, the over-the-top providers do that, and also the traditional TV providers go that direction. Now, that's easy to be said. The TV in the future, and more so, is just the driver for more data consumption. And if I give you the numbers of what is still growing in the market after 17 years of liberalization, it's only the data volume, both on fixed and on mobile. Voice is declining, both on fixed and on mobile. all these business models that I mentioned, carrier pre-select, call by call, also unbundling is declining and dying. Also, and that is yet to be proven, that MVNO models work. Same thing, you don't own the network, you become a provider. It may work if you have a strong brand, and that could drive customer interest, but that has yet to be proved if that's a model to create more business. So it's only data, and if you look at the statistics that they get released by our regulator on a yearly basis, and that's kind of course, from our point of view, because we are an investor, it's only data that we have to build our business case upon. Coming to the questions that were asked, the crisis. I have witnessed 2 crises. Also, the one already in 2000, I was already CEO of the company then. To make a long story short, that led to a Chapter 11. It was a healthy business with a sick balance sheet. Revenue was growing, EBITDA was growing, cash flow was growing, but it became apparent that we accumulated too much debt. So I already witnessed a Chapter 11 in our company from 2001 to 2003, which resulted in a new shareholder. The next crisis, 2008, 2009, it was mentioned earlier by many of the colleagues on the podium. We decided to do so-called anti-cyclical investments, which means we invested more than in normal times, because we are a company that offers services to residential market. And there, it was mentioned before, and it's actually true, the demand grew. If you don't go to the movie anymore, if you don't go to the restaurant anymore, you don't want to let go of both your internet and your TV services. And this so-called anti-cyclical investment strategy was extremely well received on the street. We talked about the share price. You should have invested then. Our stock price from 2008 to now went up 10 times. Should have invited me in 2008. What it also did is it opened up opportunities on the M&A side. And we acquired, after 2008, we acquired 3 large companies. In 2011, we acquired Germany-based KBW, that's a cable operator, at 3.16 billion. We acquired Unity Media, also a German operator, at 3.6 billion. And in 2013, we acquired Virgin Media, UK-based Virgin Media, at 16 billion. All these acquisitions, being the largest acquisitions worldwide in our industry in that particular year. So, and that is something that needs to be said. Since we're an American company, it's a very opportunistic way of going about it, but it did create M&A opportunities. Currently, also M&A is slowing down a little bit, and also that relates me to the third question where you said, does it make sense to offer services in more than 1 countries? Obviously, our strategy was to do that, and the choice was to go into the Western European countries. ARPUs are relatively high, economies are relatively stable, and the scale is there. Not in the infrastructure, but obviously you wouldn't run all the email servers out of 12 countries. You would consolidate this into 2 countries. I'm very proud to say that in our company, one of the locations is Vienna. We run about 30 million email accounts out of our Vienna office. That is a typical scale issue. Of course, there is scale on the content acquisition to negotiate with all the big studios for video on demand content and channels. It makes sense to negotiate for more than 1 country, and that was a strategy. And it worked well, and now we stand at servicing 60 million households, mostly in Western Europe, and revenues are good, and EBITDA and cash flows also, and that's a story to the street. Not sure if you should still buy the stock, but you can. And what also happened there is a recent development which was considered a game changer, not sure if it was mentioned, is from those three services that I talked about from a competitive point of view, voice, data and TV. We have seen acquisitions that we didn't expect, like Vodafone buying a cable operator, which means a mobile company is buying a fixed company, because that is a major trend, that all services are provided by one operator, called bundling. It's called convergent services, and that's kind of the trend for the future, that in the residential market we assume that mobile and fixed and all three services, voice, data and TV, will be supplied by one provider. In particular, it was also mentioned earlier, because in the home there is a real convergence, and all or most devices do Wi-Fi. If it's a smartphone, an iPad, a laptop, even a TV, and the customer doesn't really know as to which service category he's just using. Is it voice? It's all apps, and it's all wireless. It's not necessarily mobile, where you transmit your data into a mast and then you make a mobile backhaul, but you would try to offload all the traffic in the home. Since 5 years, we only install Wi-Fi modems and do all the offloading of all this traffic, voice, data or TV, on the modem, and then it's transferred via fixed line from there. And that's a trend that is growing. It's called bundling, convergence. It led to very surprising M&A activities, and that's also where the investments go, assuming that all three services will produce ARPUs to justify the investments. And current situation is still, we keep investing heavily. We believe in the model, and in particular, if others become hesitant, the Americans tend to be even more aggressive. Not only it does drive the market, it can also open up M&A opportunities, which we also see for the future.
Спасибо, Томас. Но, насколько я понимаю, ваш рецепт получается консолидация и провайдеров, и услуг, и даже регуляторов.
That's true. Well, that would be a good summary for sure. We try to consolidate providers in order to get to the scale, the services, and also regulators. It would be a good thing. I don't know how it is in your country, but in Austria, even the frequencies are possessed either by the telecom regulator or the media regulator. If it's used for mobile, then these frequencies cost money. If it's used for TV services, they're just given away to the local incumbent TV operator. Very strange. It's the same thing. I don't know how it is in your country, but of course there is a consolidation need as well.
И государственное рефинансирование, получается, по сути, реинвестирование в инфраструктуру.
Well, yes.
Чтобы подытожить, да, так сказать?
Yeah. Well, we had to. We detected that after 17 years of liberalization, some areas in the market don't work. They just don't have 100 megabit, and they will never have it because on a commercial basis, nobody will go there. So there needs to be government intervention, and then it has to be wisely done, of course, but it requires it. It's a political decision to also cover these areas, because based on a business decision, nobody will go there.
Спасибо большое, Томас. Но давайте перейдем все же к России.